It's been said before many times that Heat and The Dark Knight are pretty much the same movie.
I have one rule.
Don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner.
Part 1. Creative Choices.
Why'd I get mixed up with that bitch?
Because she got a great ass! And you got your head all the way up it!
What gives you the right? What's the difference between you and me?
I'm not wearing hockey pads.
There are action set-piece moments between Heat and The Dark Knight that are the same set piece. There's hitting an armor truck with an 18-wheeler to turn it over and get at whatever's inside. There's the bank heist with masks. There's these aerial shots. They're at both about the same point in the runtime of the movie. There's the shooting style of the meeting between the cat and the mouse. A lot of the locations are similar stuff like, offices, parking decks, mostly abandoned piers with shipping containers. Both films use modern architecture. They're both neo-noir. Part 2. Background.
If Batman Begins is a classic adventure, we call it a comic book movie. There's a lot of different comic books.
Sure.
It's an adventure film. It's, it's him traveling around the world and finding himself and trying to figure out how does he respond to this terrible thing that's happened to him. What is he going to become? Second film was a genre shift into a urban crime film.
Right.
And that to me was so exciting to take the same characters, the same actors, the same story, but shift it now into something that was more in the mold of, and I remember clear as a bell. I didn't see it with Chris, but we did see it the same year when Michael Mann's film Heat came out. And I went and saw it at McClurg Court in Chicago, opening weekend. You had this fully naturalistic world.
Right.
And by the end, it's a Greek opera. And fully a third of the audience walked out. It was so loud, that gunfight in the middle of it was so loud. That movie made such an impression on me.
Yeah.
They both have a lot of what you can call competency porn,
Hardened Kevlar plates over titanium-dipped tri-weave fibers.
where it's just detectives being very good at their job.
And it was $1.6 million in bearer bonds, and they ignored the loose cash.
Because they had no time, because they were on a clock, which means they knew our response time to a 211, had our air, immobilized it, entered, escaped in under 3 minutes. It's a good spot here. We got good escape routes. 2 freeways within a quarter of a mile. Traffic video camera, probably disabled. Check it anyway.
You recognize the MO?
MO is that they're good. Once it escalated into a murder 1B for all of them after they killed the first 2 guards, they didn't hesitate. Pop guard number 3, because what difference does it make? Why leave a living witness? Drop of a hat, these guys will rock and roll. The shape charge. The shape charge indicates that they are technically proficient. Proficient enough to go in on the prowl, so let's start looking for recent highline burglaries that have mystified us.
That's Brooke underneath. Gonna take ballistics off a shattered bullet?
No. Fingerprints.
They have a really similar color palette. They use similar scores. Before the Nolan Batman movies, you wouldn't really associate Batman with these kind of electronic, percussive, moody, driving scores. The same can be said for crime dramas like Heat. There's a lot of choices where there's this kind of like offbeat, frenetic editing. It's like, it's meant to be jarring and non-standard and hyper-modern. There's the shot of Neil in front of the window, the iconic shot of just like, here's this guy that doesn't have any life outside what he does, no furniture in his room, and then a really similar shot in The Dark Knight. Part 3. Overall structure. Both of these movies have a huge cast of characters at all levels of the society, at all levels of relatedness to the core conflict in the main arc. They all have their little mini arcs. They're both structured into 5 acts, like a Shakespearean tragedy. You get the first act to introduce the pieces, the second act to ramp everything up, third is when everything happens, this is the turning point, this is the climax. Everything hinges on this. Everything after really is just a cool down and just the sort of tumbling of the inevitable consequences. Nothing is going to be reversed here. It's just going to finish playing itself out.
This sense of drive to a certain point, move into the inner lives of these people, explore that in a very formal structure. Everything is changed, the circumstances all change, and then that results in resuming the crime story drive and police story drive. The small idea of the film is that fortune does not really enter into it. People say, well, unfortunately this happened, or fortuitously that happened. Well, that's bullshit. There is not much fortune in what happened. I mean, if it enters into it, but it's a minor player in what happens in our lives. Most of what happens in our lives is what we have cause to have happen.
The final outcome through Acts 4 and 5 is inevitable, but we're glued to it anyway. Both movies wait until halfway through to have their big 2 stars face off, and in this face-off have a very similarly shot back and forth where they realize they're not so different. Heat in particular is really symmetrical in the way it sets up its conflicts. You have the initial heist where they rob the armored car, and that sets up the inevitable time bomb between Neil and Vincent, and then you have the conflict between Neil and Waingro, and then Neil and Van Zant, and then you resolve those conflicts in reverse order from how they were set up. Neil kills Van Zant, Neil kills Waingro, and then finally Vincent catches him and Vincent kills Neil.
And sometimes it's impossible to undo the interlacing strings of causality. It needs some kind of cosmic microscope to look into each of our lives to see what cause and effect produce the present, but it's things that we made happen for the most part, consciously, unconsciously, so that there's a kind of a almost moral and causal relativity. So that's what the fate is in the film. I mean, it was just something you had to figure out. So that Neil, precisely because he is very dogmatic in his approach, if he deviates from that rigid idea of here's how I must be, then perforce things will go wrong. Okay, he can't suddenly go get all spontaneous. It's all of a sudden, there's no rudder on that boat. And then he's subject and vulnerable to being swept by emotions, like the idea to go back after Waingro, which he shouldn't have done, which Neil McCauley in the beginning of the film never in a million years would have done. But because he elected to be spontaneous in his emotional commitment to Edie, it undid all of them. Whereas Krisha Hurlis, who has no form and is formless, is completely adaptable. And he survives, and then we'll call it can't survive. So what each character, who and what each character is and sets up for himself, determines what happens to him. And so the conceit of the film is that the laws of cause and effect, what will befall you, is a function of how you think about the life you're in.